today. We worked a little bit together when you were writing for MoneyLawyer.com, and I was at ACAMS, and I know I think I've run into you once or twice since then. It's been a while, but when I saw that you were working here, I said, well, this would be a great opportunity to both talk about the organization, and that's the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, and get your take on, from a high level, some of the things that your colleagues are working on as are you. I do know, I've known Kevin Mall for a couple of decades. I knew Kevin when he would cover the financial sector, and he went off overseas for a number of years, so we connected back. So he was kind enough to both do a couple of interviews with me and guest lecture one of my classes. I teach this is relevant to our conversation, a money laundering, corruption, and terrorism class at George Mason, the graduate class. And I'm able to bring in people like Kevin and others to talk to the students about this important area. So with that as a backdrop, tell us a bit about OCCRP. What's its mission, and how does it work? I know there's a lot of different things they're involved in.
There is. Thank you so much for having me. Let me see if I can make it snappy, I guess, of what we do. We do so much. The way that OCCRP is organized really is we have member centers all around the world. Mostly we work in countries where independent media, especially investigative journalism, is under threat or non-existent, in fact, in some places. And so our mission is to develop investigative journalism, support investigative journalists in those countries, work with them, provide resources. This can be in the form of security or providing a publishing platform if they can't publish in their own country under their own name. We provide a lot of trainings, and we provide a lot of editorial resources as well. Sometimes journalists come to us with an idea, and we take it from the idea stage, develop it. Sometimes these investigations are very long. They can take up some are years, years long, depending on the complexity and the situation on the ground. And we take it all the way through, to fact checking and publishing. So there's different levels of involvement depending on the location and depending on the story. But that's basically what we do. And the idea is that journalists hold the power to account within their own countries. So organized crime and corruption, they understand better than anyone what's happening there, what's important, who the players are, and we support them in doing this kind of work.
So describe your role. You're listed as an editor. Are you involved throughout? Is it a typical editorial role in which you're fact checking your colleagues? Tell us a bit about your role here, because obviously it's an important aspect of getting that final product on the website or out in various media vehicles.
Sure. So just quickly, after I worked for ACAMS for MoneyLaundering.com, I freelanced for a number of years. And then when I took the job with OCCRP, I started as a member of the core editing team. And those are editors who get the investigation in the end. And then it goes through several levels of editing and fact checking, and they're the ones who prepare the package to go out into the world. And then I transitioned into the investigative editor role, which is what I do now. And I work more directly with the reporters from beginning of the investigation and carry it through, hand it off to the core editors who then do the editing and fact checking and the publishing. So I've had several different roles, and I work with reporters in a lot of places in Kenya and Romania, for example, but my focus right now is developing investigations and reporters in Cyprus and Malta. That's been my focus for the past year. Doesn't mean I don't do the occasional story outside of Cyprus and Malta once in a while. And of course, most of our stories are cross-border. So Uh, we have a story coming out soon. That's a collaboration between our Romanian member center and Maltese journalists. So this is how organized crime works, and this is how we need to work, because we say it takes a network to fight a network. And I know you wanted to ask me the role of investigative journalist, so I'll wait for that.
Sure. Yeah. No, we'll come back to that. I mean, if people go to the website, they'll see a number of the projects. We interviewed some of your colleagues on the Russian asset tracker a bit ago, and obviously been involved in the Pandora Papers. People are well aware of that. What does the organization consider? This is a broad question, a success. And I'll preface it by saying, obviously, you're involved with some advocacy groups, either directly or indirectly, in providing them with information so they can advocate. A simple example would be if a country does not have a strong beneficial ownership record-keeping reporting requirement, you guys shine a light on what happens when you don't have that information, and that could move policymakers to make adjustments. So it's like anything else. When you quote lobby, you never know how you define success. But when you guys finish a story, you finish a project, and it goes out in the world and people are reacting to it, what do you consider successful? The mere fact that you shone the light on the corruption and the illegal acts and how it occurred, or is it more than that? Or I assume it depends, obviously, on the particular project.
Yes, this is a really interesting question. So we consider something impact when there's consequences to something that we have reported on. For example, the former central banker of Lebanon was recently sanctioned, and we want to say is the consequence of the investigation. It's hard to always say this is the consequence of our reporting, because law enforcement or Treasury officials, they don't say this is because of an OCCRP investigation. However, we sometimes see that something happens as a result of our reporting, and in fact, even see the language from our stories sometimes used in the justification of the action, of the enforcement action. And so, yes, it's always good to see impact. It's hard work, it's dangerous work, and spending 6 months, 12 months on an investigation and nothing coming out of it can be depressing. So yes, we do like to see impact. You mentioned working with advocacy organizations. Really we work with like Transparency International. We partner with them. So we don't ourselves do lobbying unless it's something very related, directly related to OCCRP's mission. Like freedom of press, protection of journalists. But organizations that have the same mission to fight corruption, we do hope that they can multiply the impact of our reporting by advocating for certain issues. For example, yes, anti-corruption missions. You mentioned the beneficial owners registry. As your listeners probably know, there was a European court ruling that basically made beneficial ownership registries in Europe inaccessible to journalists suddenly, overnight. And this had a huge impact on our ability to report our stories. And so, yes, we did get involved in advocating for it. We, for example, pulled together a bunch of the stories that were reliant on this kind of information and published a story basically saying these would not have been possible if we did not have access to beneficial ownership registries. So yes, when things directly impact our people or our mission, we get involved, but mostly, we try to stick to the journalism, to the facts, and what happens with it afterwards is good. If hopefully something does happen afterwards, but it's kind of out of our hands at that point.
Sure. That makes sense. There's a number of projects listed in investigative stories on your website, and one that I looked at a few days ago is members of the alleged Singapore money laundering syndicate bought London properties worth $56 million. I know you weren't involved in that, but this does go to the issue of both beneficial ownership information, but also purchasing real estate in cash, which is obviously still a problem in the U.S. and many other places. But before we went on to have this conversation, you had mentioned a story from a couple of years ago of a coup in Gabon, I think it was. You want to talk a little bit about that because it's similar issues, it seems to me.
Yeah, correct. I wasn't involved in the story we just published this week about the Singapore gang, but I can talk about the story we wrote a few years ago about the first family from Gabon who we learned had properties in DC. And so we reported on those and understood that they purchased a number of properties in the DC area, worth, I believe, $4.5 million in total. And that was 4.2 million US dollars. And that was the members of the first family, the Bongo family that's been ruling Gabon for decades and are known to be to have wealth beyond their salaries.
Sure.
Let's put it that way. And also a judge who was considered to have kept them in power. So she also had properties in DC. And what we found is all those properties were purchased with cash. And of course, the issue is evident to your listeners who understand that banks and other financial service providers have requirements, and hopefully they are doing their suspicious transaction reporting and asking questions and doing their KYC. But if you're buying property in cash in Washington, D.C., no one is required to ask questions and no one's required to report it. So what we found is that actually it's a really popular destination for corrupt dictators. We reported a story on Jammeh, who was the ruler of Gambia, having a mansion in the DC area. I'll call it a mansion. It was about $3.5 million worth in the Potomac area. And it was then seized after our investigation. So, these are neighbors in the DC area. It's interesting that we know that it's such a big. And listen, we have New York and Miami and San Francisco and all these areas that we know are people like to park their money in real estate, and the fact that we don't require any kind of reporting or any kind of questions to be asked for the source of money, it's a problem. It's where the stolen money from some of the poorest countries ends up.
Yeah, there's no question about that. But we shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the importance of investigative journalism in general, but also the danger. I think we all are very well aware, no matter where you sit, of the attacks on journalists, attacks on the media for political reasons and many other nefarious reasons. So it's not an easy career path, I'm sure. But talk a little bit about why it's important, besides the obvious, because you are shining a light on illegal activity when it's discovered, but also the dangers involved, because I think that's something that not enough people appreciate. We went through a couple of presidential elections here in the States where when the media would show up, they'd be yelled at and threatened, but it's also happening around the world. And you and I talked offline before I got on that and a Marquette alum, Jim Foley, was assassinated by a photojournalist by ISIS in 2014. And there's a massive effort based on that to help those that have been kidnapped. So just in general, how do your colleagues feel about this when they go on these investigations? And like you said, it can take 6 months, it could take a year, it could take a while. What's the thought process regarding danger?
So my colleagues face threats on several levels. The most obvious thing that we think about all the time when we're doing this work is actually being sued. And we're very, very careful with the facts. We have many levels of editorial checks and fact checking and legal scrutiny. before we publish something, we are 100% sure that we got the facts right. And yet, there are these things called slaps. These are lawsuits designed to intimidate journalists, right? So, for example, a journalist could be sued for $2 million, which is an absurd amount for a journalist, by the subject of an investigation or by somebody who was mentioned in an investigation. They know they won't win on the facts, but it's going to create a lot of stress and a lot of legal costs, and basically distract journalists from investigating while they're dealing with this lawsuit. Obviously, some jurisdictions are more problematic than others, and this has been a big discussion. In Europe, there's proposals on how to deal with anti-SLAPP regulations, legislation. But then there's always also the physical threat of doing this work, right? So when you're investigating organized crime and corruption, and so often they overlap, we're very aware that this is a very serious subject. And I believe the statistics show that this is probably the most dangerous, physically dangerous beat to cover. Obviously, people have a lot to lose, power and money.
Sure.
And we really try to train the reporters we work with to know what to look for in terms of being followed, being surveilled, because we know from experience that this is the kind of things that take place before they are, before people are attacked, before they're murdered. So, we do everything we can to create a situation to make sure that the reporters are prepared and could recognize a situation where there's a danger or threat, and then we have certain procedures that we activate at that point. For example, removing the reporter from their home or from the country, depending on how long, depending on the situation, and depending on where the threat is coming from. But it's always a risk.
Sure.
And it is really dangerous work for the people within their countries. I would say more so than me. I feel a little bit, privileged with my American passport. I have more protection than, say, a journalist in Kenya or a journalist in Romania. But it's also really important work because, as I mentioned earlier, these cross-border investigations is what ends up exposing these transnational criminal organizations, this transnational crime. We know money moves in different jurisdictions for that reason, right? To confuse the investigators, to make it very difficult to follow the money. And this is what we can do. We have this network we can tap into in a way that I think law enforcement does not, at least not as easily. And that makes our work, I think, unique.
But let me ask you, you have a number of degrees. You got, as you said, you did some freelancing. You were at MoneyLaundry.com. You were at U.S. News and World Report. What made you decide to be in the investigative journalist side? So was it a straight line path, or when you started doing reporting, you thought this is an additional area of reporting that I'd like to get involved in? So walk us through your career choices to where you've been here since 2019. So tell us a little bit about how you arrived at OCCRP.
That's the hardest question.
Okay.
Let me try to again make it more succinct. I knew I loved doing investigative journalism. Why? I knew this because when I was in a grad school for journalism, my investigative journalism class was in. We were trying to identify who kidnapped and murdered the Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl, that most listeners will recognize. And as the class was supposed to take a semester, but as these investigations do, it took 3 years for us to finish the investigation and to publish it. For those 3 years, I was completely obsessed with the story. I slept in the office at Georgetown so I could wake up in the middle of the night to call Pakistan for sources, to speak to sources. I poured through documents. I replayed, horrible, gruesome videos. on slow motion so I could identify details. So I realized that this is the kind of work that doesn't feel like work to me. It feels like I'm solving a mystery. And so it was really interesting. When I went to work for U.S. News and World Report, it was an incredible experience working, reporting on politics and policy. But it did, it was weekly stories on whatever was happening in the world, and not so much digging into something, sinking your teeth into something. Then when I went to work for moneylaundering.com, I really appreciated that experience because it was so much more in the weeds, right? It's incremental. You have to really understand what's important to your audience in order to give them a story that matters. And the stories that matter to that audience were like tiny little incremental changes, things that were coming down the pipeline, scoops. They were scoops, and they were really fun. And I got to make some really great sources and learn a lot about anti-money laundering. Of course, that got me interested in what I'm doing now, which is investigating basically, money laundering, financial crime,
Sure.
corruption. Yeah.
I'll get you out of here on this. I really appreciate you taking the time. I also want to mention that OCCRP was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2023, and a lot of the great information available on their website. But given the fact that you are involved in detecting, reporting, and overseeing stories about corruption, are you optimistic? Do you feel that, not about the organization, but just in general, because obviously we're all dealing with, it's a dark time around the world. Give us a sense, is there optimism that we can get some of this right? Transparency International, by the way, we've interviewed those folks a number of times. Global Financial Integrity, they obviously are pushing really hard to make change. And when you talk to them, they seem optimistic, not that they're going to be super successful, but that what they're doing is going to make some, at least, changes around the margins. How do you feel as an investigative journalist? There's so much out there that you're shining a light on, but are you optimistic that we can improve things?
May I speak personally? I am optimistic because I think our stories elevate these issues into the mainstream and to people's consciousness, right? Whereas I think maybe 10 years ago, there wasn't really a conversation about, say, wildlife trafficking,
Right.
Being an issue of organized crime. It became an issue that people are aware of, and a conversation, and conversations lead to hopefully policy change and things like that. So corruption, not a new subject for people to understand, but I think the things that we shed a light on, as I think you put it, I think it's important to keep doing that and keep bringing the conversation to the mainstream, to the forefront, because if we don't, then it becomes just accepted, and there's cynicism, there's just levels. And some of the countries I work in, some of the countries where the reporters I work with are, this is a real issue where people, clearly not the reporters, otherwise they wouldn't be risking their lives to do this, but much of the population is just cynical about everyone being corrupt, and there never being progress, and it's just always going to be this way. But even in those countries, I've seen, I mean, yes, there's, ups and downs, but I've seen progress in terms of what the electorate does not find acceptable anymore. And really that's really our work, right? To bring the facts to the readers, to the people going to the voting booths, and for those people to decide, am I going to re-elect this government? Am I going to vote for this person that,
Right.
Owns properties in London worth 10 million, 20 million, 60 million in one case, bought with cash. So really this is, I think I have to stay optimistic in order to keep doing this because it's hard.
Kira, I really appreciate both your time and your insight and what the organization is doing. I would urge folks to go on their website. They do take donations as well. And this is an area that is definitely needs support from the general public, because without the sunshine, there'll be no change. But I appreciate ending on a positive note. We're going to continue in our conversations to talk to people like yourself. But thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, John. And in addition to donations, we also take tips from sources on our website. There is a way to send us information anonymously, and we will always look at it. Thank you.
Okay.